Hello and welcome in to another episode of Rolling with My Special Friends. Today we have a very special guy coming to us. Coach Yoxall has traveled pretty much all over the country doing strength and conditioning for over 35 years, changed a lot of people's lives, got a pretty cool story. He's also had a brother that's had some injuries to go through and been on that side of the thing of helping people out, but also watching a guy like that overcome some great things. So it's just a really cool person that I think we needed to bring on the podcast and let everybody hear his story. So, Coach, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Jim. It's good to see you, man.
Good to see you. Now, as we love to do on this podcast, just to jump into these things with these stories with both feet, tell us in strength and conditioning, and you've been doing it 35 years, what woke you up one day and said, hey, I want to do this? I mean, I want to spend the rest of my life doing strength and conditioning.
Well, as I told you, my story is a little bit different. It's a bit atypical of a lot of strength and conditioning coaches. Just like most young men, I went through high school playing all kinds of sports and things like that. And that led me to going to East Texas State, and I continued to work out and train while I was at East Texas State. And we really didn't have strength coaches back then per se. I started there in 1978, in the fall of 78. We had a barbell club there on campus. There were a handful of us that really enjoyed lifting, but it wasn't like what you were accustomed to seeing at Auburn when I was head strength coach at Auburn. It wasn't as organized or anything like that. And there were just, as I said, a handful of us that really enjoyed training. And that led to us competing in the off season, competing in powerlifting contests. And as that went on, I finished up with college. I majored in special education. I started teaching down in Baytown, Texas, started teaching special education. I continued to compete in weightlifting during that time and powerlifting. And I had a friend who was a strength coach at TCU at the time. And I just met my wife, and she had gone to TCU, and we went to a TCU football game. And this friend of mine, Robbie Robinson, I went down to the field just to say hi to him. We had a mutual acquaintance in college. Robbie was a shot putter at the University of Texas, and I had a good friend that was a thrower at East Texas State. They'd gone to high school together, and so Robbie and I knew each other. We had trained, we had lifted together when he was in college. I went down to say hello to him, and at that time in the state of Texas, in the mid '80s, strength coaching was already a profession, obviously, because Robbie was there at TCU, but it was primarily a profession on the collegiate level for all sports, and primarily on the professional level in the NFL, a little bit in the NBA, not so much in baseball or other professional sports, but primarily in the NFL. And at that point, as I heard about strength coaches being hired in high schools throughout the state of Texas, I thought, you know what, I could join that with teaching special education, because being a male in special ed, I really had my choice of jobs coming out of college. And I thought, I could combine those two, and that might be worthwhile doing it. So I was talking to Robbie about it, and I said, the main thing I need to find out is the conditioning piece of it. I knew all about the weightlifting, I knew all about the powerlifting part of it and how to do that, but I needed to know how to combine that conditioning part. And right there on the field, I was standing at the wall up in the stands, just leaning over, talking to him. And right then and there, he said, why don't you become my GA? And as I told you yesterday when we spoke, I had no idea what GA stood for. And I was pretty intrigued. And he said, yeah, we'll pay you a monthly stipend. We'll pay for your master's degree, and you'll come here and work here for me. And you get your certification as a strength coach, and you can move on from there. And so, man, I remember I shot back up in the stands with my wife and my in-laws. My wife and I had just got married, and the in-laws were up in the stands. And, well, how's Robbie? I said, oh, he's great. He offered me a job. And at the time, like I said, I didn't know what GA stood for. Well, GA stands for graduate assistant. And that stipend he was talking about was about $150 a month.
Wow.
And but they did pay for my degree. So, back in those days, it was a lot different. Here we were, Southwest Conference School, Division I. We had a 1,200 square foot weight room. We had 4 squat racks, 4 platforms, 4 benches, 4 inclines, and a smattering of machines for all 16 sports, all men and women. And there were just 2 of us working those teams out. So it was quite a baptism into the strength conditioning field. Fast forward a couple of years, I'm about to finish my degree. Robbie decides to leave and take a high school job in Texas. He became a very successful high school head football coach in Mesquite, Texas, and just retired. And there I was, and they named me the interim strength coach. They did a search, and I tell everybody, by the grace of God, I got hired, because at that point, I didn't have much experience. I was older for being a graduate assistant. I didn't go back I didn't go into doing this till after I'd been teaching 4 or 5 years, teaching special ed for 4 or 5 years. So anyway, at that point, I really wanted the job. Originally I was going to go back and teach, but I really, really wanted the job. And again, good Lord had his hands on it, and I got hired. And I stayed at TCU from 87 until 92. And then various jobs came up. I left there, went to the University of Minnesota, and was there for 3 years. The UCLA job opened up. I applied for it. I went out to Los Angeles with my family for 3 more years. And really, we were quite successful in California. I had no plans on leaving. And a bunch of the guys that I'd worked with at TCU and at Minnesota, a bunch of the football coaches, they had matriculated to Ole Miss and joined Coach Tuberville. And then they were coming to Auburn. And Noel Mazzoni called me up and asked me to come out and check out the Auburn job. And I did it more as a favor to him than anything, because, as I said, we were very successful at UCLA. I had no reason to leave. I wasn't in love with living in Los Angeles. I hope that doesn't offend anybody, but wasn't in love with living in Los Angeles just from a cost of living standpoint, but I loved coaching there. Matter of fact, I think I became a better strength coach by being at UCLA. I think that was my biggest education about becoming a better strength coach, was at being at UCLA and all the different athletes and levels of athletes I was exposed to. But at any rate, flew down into Auburn, and on a Saturday night, got up Sunday morning, met with Coach Tuberville, looked around, and I called my wife up and I said, "Hey, we're doing this. We're coming down here." So anyway, went to Auburn. That lasted for, as you know, 14 years, 14 great years. Kids got to grow up there. A highly unusual situation that I was able to stay there for that long. And I'll always feel very grateful about that. When the time came for us to leave, we had left Texas in 1992. And at this point, it was 20 years down the road, and it was time to get back to Texas. So came back and worked at Rice University, and some things didn't work out at Rice for us. And since that time, I've been at 3 different high schools and 1 professional team here in Texas since we got back. So that's kind of how it started. A lot of guys that'll start immediately after they graduate, they go into being a graduate assistant or an intern and work their way up. I really didn't start becoming a strength coach till I was about 27 years old. So my path was a little different than most. Now, very grateful for all the choices that all the opportunities I've been given, and the choices that we've made as a family going through this.
Now, to pull it backwards just a little bit, let's pop in that special education piece. What made you, before the world of weightlifting came into you, why were you wanting to go into special ed? Was there a touching part there for you?
Well, I tell you what, that's a bit of an interesting story too, because I'm your classic middle child. Okay. I was the one in my family that I was in a lot of trouble. Grades weren't ever very good. Other than athletics, my efforts elsewhere were not very good. And my senior year, I went to Bishop Lynch High School in Dallas, Catholic high school in Dallas. And our senior year, we had what's called a senior service project, and you have to pick various places to go and volunteer and things like that. And my sister had volunteered at a school for kids with different disabilities called Angels Incorporated, and it was all right over there in East Dallas. And and again, I wasn't a real motivated student, and I knew my sister Helen had volunteered there before, and I thought, well, what the heck, I'm going to go volunteer at Angels Incorporated. Well, I went over there, dude, and I fell in love with it. I fell in love with helping those kids out. Most of them were had mental disabilities, and I decided about, I don't know, in the fall of my senior year, I had no direction. I had thought about joining the military. I just I didn't know what I wanted to do. And anyway, I decided I had a counselor at the school, Father Joe Collada, and we talked, and he said, "Look, I think you've got a the ability to become a very good teacher. And that's when I decided to go to college, major in special education. That's how I ended up at East Texas State.
Well, now, see, that to me, that's the important part of this piece of telling your story and how special you are, because that also translated right into helping these kids that you're doing with weight training. You already had the heart for helping kids and touching lives. And obviously, God, as you said, gave you the opportunity to get in there and do that. So I really think that special education piece is an important part of your story.
Well, and I tell people, when people don't know about that, I think, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way at all, but I think being a special ed teacher in many, many ways actually helped me become a better strength conditioning coach, because you got to be persistent, and you got to have a plan and stick to a plan, but at the same time, you got to adapt and overcome as well. And I think that training, I think, helped me out a great deal. And when I say that, people kind of laugh and they think I'm trying to make a joke. I'm not. That training really guided me. It really did. And it's kind of funny how things ended up working out. Originally in 1987, my plan was to go back to teaching special ed and being a strength coach on the high school level. And, you take the trip all the way around. That's until just recently, I was back at a high school being a strength and conditioning coach here in Texas. So it all kind of, full circle moment, I guess you could say.
Well, and following your career as well, to see obviously 35 years of it coming through. As you and I have talked before, you've had some athletes now that are in their 40s, in their 50s, that are coming full circle, and you get to see their lives of how they've turned into good young men, or actually grown men with their own kids and doing their own thing.
Men and women, both.
Yes. That's pretty special. Now, tell us, to get off into the strength and conditioning part of it just a little bit. If a person is out there and they're in this day and age we're in of all this digital stuff, that you could go online and get a personal trainer, or they don't have to go to the gym anymore, they can do it right there in their house. Are you a fan of that, or do you still think that strength and conditioning, you need to go to the gym with the personal trainer, or you need that coach in your face?
Well, I think it just depends on the person. There's a lot of people that are intrinsically motivated enough to do it on their own. I think having the guidance of somebody either online, on your phone, on an app, I think that's always good for somebody that might need some guidance on A, how to do it correctly. Okay. And then B, from a motivational standpoint, if the person needs that motivational piece as well. I think having personal trainers, strength conditioning specialists, coaches, I think that can be very beneficial. Is it necessary? Not so much, but you do want to make sure you're doing it right. And there again, digital age, getting on the internet, you got to be careful about what you look into as well. I would just look for somebody that's got, nowadays it's pretty easy to get all those initials behind your name, right. But there's several certifications out there that have some teeth, as I say. And you need to look for those type of certifications that are really, really beneficial, because, boy, I tell you what, I can do a search right away and for a personal trainer here in the Waco, Texas area. And I can find a lot of people. And there's a lot of good quality trainers here in Waco, Texas, but also I think there's probably some sham artists as well, and that's everywhere. That's not a indictment on Waco, Texas, but it's just everywhere. So you got to be really careful about who you pick out and who you look for and things like that. And does it have to be at a gym? No, not necessarily, but the gym is a lot of times, if you're committed enough to go to a gym, that helps out too. In other words, if you're committed to get in your car, walk, or however you get to it, ride your bike, you're committed enough to go over there and get there and take the time to train. Personally, now I never really trained at home until we got fired at Auburn. And as you know, Auburn's a small place, and we were going to stay there until my daughter graduated from high school. And I wasn't really particularly interested in going to any gyms and talking Auburn athletics at that point, and I had a lot of stuff in my garage. I had never really used it a whole lot. And I started training at home, and now I almost exclusively train here. I was up this morning, dark 30, getting in a workout before, I started doing all my sending my emails out that I do every day. things like that. I like the solace of, and maybe this is an age thing at 63. I like the solace of training at my house and doing it on my own. And every time I bring something home to add to my gym, my wife looks at me like I got three heads. I don't know when we're going to run out of room, but anyway, I just like that. I like training at home. There's a gym here that I go to about twice a month, one time a month, just for a little change of pace. And it's kind of you might imagine, you know me pretty well. It's a old school place. It's not real shiny or anything like that. And a lot of the people that go there kind of have the same headspace as I do. So I do that for every so often.
Well, and that's kind of what I was, bringing up to now that we've gone through the COVID world and everybody kind of being touchy about, things of getting into those gyms, but still wanting to get a good workout. And what also, now that you've talked about the strength piece of it, give somebody that's listening, out there a piece of advice on the nutritional side of it. Is it obviously everybody should know that you can't go eat cheeseburgers every day and work out, and those two work together. So kind of what would you recommend on a daily? Everybody can't go buy all the organic foods and all these other things to do it just so a perfect way, but what is your way of nutrition?
I think it's just a good choice. It's all about choices. I used to tell players all the time, athletes all the time, if you're eating and it's fried, you're wrong. Okay. Now, that being said, you still got to live too, though, right? So now it comes back to choices. If you're eating something and it's fried and you're doing this every day, that is definitely wrong. If you're doing it 3 or 4 times a week, you're still wrong. If you're doing it once a week, something like that, okay, yeah, you got to live. You got to be able to have some indulgence, healthy indulgence in your life in terms of just freeing your mind of guilt about what you're eating. But so the first thing is how food is prepared. Second thing is choosing the food that you're going to eat. If you're eating a lot of fatty type meats and stuff like that, and I love beef, but if you're eating a lot of fatty type beef, that's not good for you either. And then you do have to watch the too high of a carbohydrate intake. You got to have carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, things like that. You have to have that for energy. But if you're taking too much of that can add to more stored fat in your body. And then you've got to use all sorts of protein. I love fish and chicken. If we're going to a restaurant, my wife laughs all the time. If they're serving salmon, I'm going to have it. I just have a taste for it and I like it. And so I think it's all about choices. And then the other thing is people say someone wants to lose weight and they want to get fit. They get really hung up on stepping on that scale. Okay. The scale is not the almighty measuring tool if you want to lose weight. The almighty measuring tool that you want to use is just how you look, how you appear, how your clothes fit. Okay, that's what I tell people. I tell them not to worry about that scale. I might get on the scale once or twice a week just to kind of see where I'm at. And currently these days, and probably for the last, 15 years, I've weighed 200 pounds every day of my life. But again, it's kind of how your clothes fit. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. You put a pair of pants on and you got to, do a little extra effort getting those pants on. Then yeah, you've got some belly fat that you might ought to lose if that's what you want to do, or how broad your shoulders are, what your chest looks like, what your legs look like. It's all a matter of what you see in the mirror as well. And that can be a good indicator that you're eating right or you're eating wrong. And then the other piece of it is being consistent with exercise. Too many people, if they haven't been consistent, they jump, you know how it goes, Jim, they jump headlong into it. And then they get discouraged because they've started out so fast. So I recommend to people, and I get calls like this all the time from former athletes. Hey, coach, can you send me that summer manual from, 2004? And I always start out and say, well, what have you been doing? That's the first thing I ask, especially former athletes. What have you been doing? And be honest with me. And then I'll give them some advice from there. But I always tell people if they haven't been real consistent, they need to start out really, really slow. Right. And then go from there. And then the other thing is, the last thing I'll say about all this is everybody gets and I've been guilty of this. I had some heart issues. I don't know if you remember that, but back at Auburn, I had some heart issues had to have some surgery and things like that. And I got way to the other side of being on a treadmill just all the time, just, walking, power walking. And everybody, no matter what your age is, has got to have that resistive training piece. You need to be, whether it's bands, dumbbells, barbells, on a weight machine with a weight stack, a plate loaded weight machine, you got to incorporate resistive training into your routine as well, because that can lend itself to losing weight, burning body fat, and adding to your bone density. And so weight training has got to be another good balance of being in an exercise program.
Well, I think it, offers people a good piece to kind of understand exactly what you said. It's also in moderation. I think that, like you said, every once in a while people want that piece of cake, or they want that fried chicken, or whatever it was. Just don't do it 7 days a week. So now, to kind of transition us into this as well, and I alluded to it early in the podcast, is I want to know, and some other people that are out there want to know the story about this brother that you got. Tell us a little bit of insight on him, what kind of injury he went through, and then some of the things you saw personally that was inspiring, because that's what our show's all about, is special people. And I've heard the story, but I want the audience to hear it, and it's just truly inspiring.
Well, I'd like to tell you about my brother Michael, but also I failed to tell you, and I can't believe I did this the other day when we hooked up. I've got another brother who's got quite a special story too. So I'll try to touch on my brother Dan at the very end as well, if you don't mind. My brother Mike, oldest brother, the oldest in our family, the oldest boy in our family. There's Mike, then there's my sister Helen, then myself, and then Dan, and then Tom. So there's 5 of us. And like I said earlier, I'm the classic middle child. But anyway, Michael, he was 47 years old, Jim. And I think it was the summer of 03 or 04. He had an accident in his house where he stumbled off the second landing of his stairwell there at his house. He had been working on his house. He was real handy and with making home repairs, and he had taken his banister off of his stairway there, and he was turning around on the second landing late one night and fell off, and he came down and landed on the ground floor and severed his cord at C7 and T1. So very, very high injury, and it was a complete injury. And there he was, 47 years old. Your injury was, you were in your 20s, as I recall, when that happened. It's a lot different when you're that much older than when you're a younger person. And I remember as he went through his rehab, a couple of things right away. Mike was a very, very intrinsically motivated person. And when it came to his occupation, he was a sales rep. And all he wanted to do was get back to work. He just wanted to get back to work. Well, you can imagine quadriplegic going through a rehab. You've been through rehab as well. He went to Baylor Rehab in Dallas, and I flew in from Alabama almost every weekend that summer just to watch him and be of support. And it was really amazing to watch him go through that rehab and just get to the point where all he wanted to do was work again. And one thing that I didn't realize back when it happened, I had always, and again, you think somebody with my background would know this, but I had always automatically thought that if you were labeled, if your injury was giving you the status of being quadriplegic as opposed to a paraplegic, I thought it had all to do entirely with your limbs. And I thought as a quad, he wasn't going to have any use of anything from neckline down. Well, as I found out as he was going through rehab, that designation, quadriplegic, paraplegic, has to do with the location of the injury. And his was located where you have that designation being a quad, but he had paralysis from the nipple line down. So he had his shoulders, dexterity of his fingers and things like that. He just didn't have anything. He didn't have anything nipple line down. So he had a bit of a fighting chance in terms of being able to transfer and things like that. And he was very diligent about getting to the point where he was strong enough to transfer from his chair. He always joked that he wasn't going to get any kind of lift or anything like that, ramp, because he's a Texan. He drives a truck, and he was going to drive his truck. So he, he had that all rigged up with a hoist in the back, and that's what he did, man. He first of all, he rehabbed his way through to where he continued to drive and travel in his job. He continued to go to an airport, get on a plane, and fly all over the country for his job. And that was his whole goal. He just wanted to go back to work. And I mentioned that I flew in every weekend to see him while he's in rehab. I really didn't get to a point where I realized what his life was like until that football season. We went undefeated in 2004, and we played in the Sugar Bowl. We played Virginia Tech, and that was really his first time to go out of town. My family's always been really supportive. Whenever we played in bowl games, they've come to Auburn. They've come to the big games at Auburn. My family has always been really supportive of coming to the games and things like that. And that Sugar Bowl was the first time since his accident that he actually got out and went to watch us play. And so that was his first time to get out and travel and do all that. So anyway, we're down there in New Orleans, and we played that night. And so that morning, the night before, I mentioned to him and to my mother and some others in the family, hey, I'll come over and I'll help you get ready for the game. My hay is in the barn. We got some meetings, and that's all we've got. So love to come over and help you. And he said, well, you can come over and watch me. He said, but you can't help me. He said, I got to do this on my own. And I went to his room, and for 3 hours, I got a real sense of what his life was like starting every day. From going through showering, getting ready, transferring out of bed, going in there and getting ready. People don't like to talk about this, but the bowel program that he had to go through, and then simply getting on that bed and pulling up all that support hose and socks and things like that, and watching him do that, and sitting in a chair just wanting to just jump in there and help him. And he's like, no, you're not touching me. I got to do this on my own. And all my worries about things like beating Virginia Tech, beating Alabama, all those kind of things that you go through coaching at a place like Auburn, all those things went away.
Yep.
In a certain respect, because I got no worries compared to somebody like that.
That's what one of the main reasons I wanted to bring that up, because that's what is truly special about you and your brother and the story, because if that doesn't, him going through what he went through, but then not wanting to help, and really, if you had a chance to talk to him, or I would, I would know, because I've been there in his shoes. He's wanting to show you he can still do it. And he has for many, many years. He's had some, I mentioned to you, he's had some shoulder issues since that time, but it's just relating it to what I do. It's just overuse, and I know you're taking care of your shoulders and stuff like that. You're still a young man. But you have to be really, really cognizant of that and really, really careful about that. But he still continues to amaze me. Well, and also, like I said, in the profession that you're in, to be around him, and it almost to me would have to be an inspiring thing of you go back to work and go, you know what, these guys I'm coaching, they just don't know how good they got it.
Oh, and I don't think I hadn't used that. Don't think I hadn't mentioned that. And I use it on myself too. I'm 63. Mike is 65, 66 years old now. I'll be dragging around the house early in the morning and thinking about how feeling sorry for myself that I need to go out and work out. And then I think about him, and I'm like, yeah, you know what? You get your ass out there. You can go to work.
Well, and another piece I want to bring up too, so people know the full circle of your life and what's going on, is another inspiring piece is to see the old expression as the acorn doesn't fall far from the tree. Tell us the piece about your daughter, of all people, taking the love for weightlifting and going into a personal trainer, and her coming home and you and her just getting after it in the garage and working out together. Is that not the coolest thing?
Well, somewhere along the line, it was back at Auburn. she got into it. Really wasn't with both kids. I mean, now they're both gonna. If they watch this, they're both gonna go, yeah. Well, I don't remember it that way, Dad. But many people would think, being a strength coach, that I would just push my kids to train. I didn't do that. Now I will say this: when it came time for them to show some interest in training, I wanted to make sure they did it correctly. And so they went through their paces with me in the weight room when they showed interest. And Marley, the youngest, she just really took to it, and she's just always been very in tune with doing this and just enjoying training. And it started in high school, and it's continued throughout her life, so much so that she decided to major in exercise physiology at TCU, where I got my master's degree. As a matter of fact, coincidentally enough, she ended up at TCU as an undergrad and had a couple of professors that I had back in the late 80s as professors when she got there.
Wow.
In whatever year it was that she got there. She graduated from high school in 12 or 13. And there were still two profs in particular that were there at TCU. And anyway, she majored in exercise phys, got her degree, got her certification as a personal trainer, and she still continues to train people now in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And when she comes home, she's my training partner when she comes home, and always asking me for advice, sending me videos, things like that. Sometimes she gets some unsolicited advice from me about training techniques. I remember one particular story when she was going to school at TCU. They were going over some subject in exercise physiology, and she called me about it one night, and I gave her my opinion. And I remember she told me she didn't know, she wasn't sure if that was correct. And I was like, okay, well, ask Dr. So-and-so tomorrow if that's not correct. She goes, okay, well, I will, Dad, but I don't think you're right. And I was like, okay. It's sure enough, she asked him and I was correct. But she and I tell that story from time to time. But yeah, she loves to train, and she went through a few things as a young woman, that a pretty severe eating disorder that she found her way out of through the help of many, many others at TCU, by the way. And now, as she does train people, she is very aware of not letting the people that she trains and the people she works with get so in tune with how they look and what they weigh and things like that. She just wants people to train to be fit. And that's a big part of her message. She does a lot of blogs and things like that, and is very involved with different eating disorder groups and associations, and just tries to send that message out there. And she went through quite a bit too, in terms of making her way through. But it's kind of fun to talk training with her, and she just continues to build upon her profession and build her resume.
Well, and that's again, another piece of this story that I knew people had to hear of what you've done, because you're not only, helping hundreds, if not thousands of male and female athletes along these 35 years, you've planted that seed in your own child. So there's no telling how many people she'll reach going down the road. So it's just an amazing what makes you one of those special people, like I talk about, that took, what you love and used it to help transfer other people's lives and just make it amazing. And your brother's story, I mean, it's just all around, everything about it. It's just a great piece. Now tell us.
If you don't mind me mentioning, Jim, and I can't believe I didn't recall this the other day when we talked on the phone, but I would like to quickly mention a younger brother of mine, Dan. Dan married a beautiful young lady named Michelle Hudson, and Michelle was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when she was in her mid-40s. And she had that disease for approximately 10 years. And she passed just a couple of years ago, and in her mid-50s. And this disease is very prevalent in her family, unfortunately. And it took her life. But another person that has inspired me is my brother Dan, because when Michelle was diagnosed, they had their 3 daughters, and they're all very, very close in age. And he basically had to raise those 3 girls by himself, plus working full time, plus taking care of Michelle. And just to watch him navigate that, and since her passing, still navigate. You can imagine raising three girls. You have a girl, and he raised these. One is still in college, the other two have graduated. But just to watch him navigate that, and his own life too, and stay as positive as he is, it's pretty amazing.
That's absolutely, I mean, does the story get any better? Because you've had almost every family member you've had has got some great inspiring stories, including yourself. I know, to change gears a little bit, people love to also hear the funny things and things to be able to laugh about. Tell us something that's maybe happened in your past that most people don't know about you. Something, maybe you've dropped a weight on your foot. Who knows? Give us something funny out there.
Well, I don't know how funny it is, because these two stories are related, but they're both kind of painful to me physically. But I competed in powerlifting and weightlifting for a very, very long time, and I was in a meet in California when I was the head strength coach at UCLA. I was at a meet in California, and in a powerlifting meet, you squat first, then you bench press, and then you deadlift. So I made it through the meet, and at this point, I'm in my 40s, and so competing at that age is a little difficult against these younger guys, but was doing okay. And it got to the point where I was deadlifting. It was my last lift of the day, last deadlift of the day. And when you grip normally when you grip a deadlift bar, you take an over and under grips. In other words, one hand is over the bar and one hand is under the bar, just so the bar doesn't roll out of your hand. Well, my right hand, I had the underhanded grip of my right hand, and this happens more often than not. And for many, many reasons, overtraining, dehydration, whatever the case may be. Anyway, I was pulling that last deadlift, and I tore my right bicep. Okay. And when you tear a muscle, you pretty much know that you've torn a muscle. It's a pretty unique feeling. Anyway, I put the bar down, had to kind of use my left hand to help my right hand ungrip the bar, just because I didn't have the dexterity because of the muscle tear to be able to do all that. My hand was kind of locked onto the bar. Got through with it, went into the training room there at UCLA. They checked things out. It wasn't the type of tear that could be surgically repaired. It wasn't torn at the tendon. It was torn in the muscle belly. So as muscle tears go, it wasn't quite as serious as a ruptured Achilles tendon or something of that nature. But anyway, tore my bicep. So that was probably 1998, 1999, something like that. Well, fast forward to Auburn days. We're at Auburn, and I don't know if you were at this game. It was after you were done at Auburn, but we were playing West Virginia at Auburn, and we had a long, long rain delay. And this might have been our national championship year. Had a long, long rain delay, and we'd go outside, lightning would strike, have to come back inside. We were back and forth. And we were in the locker room. The skies cleared, and we were going to go out onto the field. So we did a kind of a quick little pseudo warm up in the weight room. And at that point, you're more concerned about getting your players hyped up and excited this sounds bad, but I knew the warming up of them was going to take care of itself once they ran around on the field and all that. But I wanted to make sure mentally everybody was ready. So, we were getting the kids up on their feet. Kids are jumping up and down. Everybody's getting kind of ready. And when a couple of years before that, West Virginia, we had gone up there and they'd taken care of us pretty good up at their place. We'd gotten beaten pretty bad. And now that they were down here. And so, that added to the excitement of it. Plus we were finally getting out on the field. So anyway, we were all running around the locker room, high-fiving, and kids were chest bumping and stuff like that. And I went to go high-five Lee Zimba. And, you remember how massive Lee Zimba was. Well, Lee and I locked hands, and, I was thinking it's just going to be your normal high-five where you hit and go, right? Well, Lee not only high-fived me, but he grabbed my hand and he pulled me towards him. Well, he grabbed my right hand. And when he did that, it tore my bicep again. Same bicep, but now we're, I don't know, we probably are 10 plus years later. But again, that feeling. And so anyway, I knew what had happened. And here we we're about to kick off an entire football game. So at the time, Clark Pearson was our trainer. Clark's now the basketball trainer at Auburn. We're on the field and we're kind of waiting for the coin toss and all those preliminary things that go on. And I walked up to Clark and I remember him saying, "Man, the kids are really ready to go. I think we're going to be okay tonight." And I said, "Yeah, but I'm going to come in and see you tomorrow for some treatment." And he said, "Why is that?" I said, "Lee Zimba just tore my right bicep." He goes, "What?" And then there was, of course, a few expletives came out of his mouth. And, "What are you talking about?" And I said, No, I know this is what happened. And so sure enough, after the game, I went to the training room and got a compression sleeve put on there and woke up the next morning. My forearm was all black and blue from the tear and the bleeding coming down into my arm, and went in to see him. And sure enough, I tore it a little bit better this time, if you could say that. Yeah. So anyway, and I don't know how many people really know that story. I mean, I just, I trained my legs and my left arm for many, many months and just kind of stayed away from that bicep. And I remember showing it to Dr. Andrews because we thought, if this is the second time, maybe we should have this surgically repaired. And he said, "No, once again, you tore it in the belly." He said, "So this just needs to repair naturally and through rehab and stuff like that." He said, "You should be okay." And sure enough, it finally did repair okay. But I tore my bicep twice, and one was by Lee Zimba. So Lee, if you're watching this, thanks, buddy.
Well, and that is truly a story that most people wouldn't know and wouldn't even understand. They wouldn't think you could pull a bicep from a high five.
Right. Yep.
All right. So to kind of wrap all this thing up, our signature series question that we love to use on our podcast is we love to ask people, if it was all over tomorrow and God called you home and somebody in your family, one of your former players, maybe even a former coaching teammate of yours, wrote a book about the story of your life to tell people about you, what would you hope was in that book?
I would never profess to be anywhere near a perfect person. And if I did try to do this on that, I'd probably be struck by lightning right now. But I guess the thing that I'd want people to feel about me is that I always worked very, very hard. Was never the smartest guy in the room, was never the most talented teacher, the most talented strength coach, but I never got outworked. And I always kind of hung my hat on that. I'd like for them to think of me as being very persistent, and a hardworking guy, and just, willing to do whatever I could for a friend, a family member, a player, whatever the case may be, just that I was always there for them to help out in any way, shape, or form that I could. But, I don't have any, I would never expect any kind of glowing reports about me or anything like that, but just that I worked really hard and tried real hard. And I was a good husband, father, friend, son, uncle, cousin, fellow coach, teammate, somebody that people could count on.
Wow. Well, I don't think it could be any better said. And I've been around you enough and know a lot of players that have been around you, and they would agree to a lot of what you just said. It's the parts of this story that we just told is what makes you special, because they didn't, on these major Power 5 conference teams you were with and all these different universities, they didn't get to see you on a Saturday. You weren't the head coach, you weren't the running back, but you were the guy that put the glue together, that held that box together that nobody ever got to see. And that's what I think that makes the story even that much more special, of the pieces that were there and the things you've done in your life. So I just want to thank you for coming on today and giving us the opportunity to tell your story.
Well, I appreciate it. And that, what you just said about people not knowing much about what I did or whatever, that was always kind of fine with me. I always kind of relished in that, because when I go to these games, and I very rarely sit in the stands, because I just can't sit with fans up in the stands, but they don't realize what people have invested in everything that's going on in that field, and yourself included, your contribution when you were there at Auburn as well. They don't understand all those, and I don't call them little things. They don't understand all those details that went into putting all that kind of stuff together. But I kind of like that. I never really needed to beat my chest to be known for that. I mean, towards the end of our time there at Auburn, my name did come up quite a bit, and it wasn't in a positive light in terms of what our record was at that moment and things like that, and which, you know, you can argue, was that fair or not, but I always kind of relished in just having the back end of things. And you know, that's the way I've always operated.
Well, and again, I appreciate you coming on and telling your story, because it's not a piece that gets seen out there on an everyday basis. I think a strength person doesn't get the credit that they deserve, and unfairly get some criticism they don't deserve either, because a lot of times that's X's and O's that change that game, not the strength of the player. I think you would probably echo this. There's a lot of great strength and conditioning coaches out there that get a bad rap, and it wasn't things that they did. It was just things that how the game played out. The ball bounced the wrong way one time, and, you know, it made it all look bad, and it wasn't as bad as it seemed.
Right. And sometimes, as you know, there's no explanation for it.
Yep.
Just things didn't line up that day, you know.
There you go. Well, thank you again for coming on, and we appreciate you. Everybody out there that's listening, go check us out on all your major podcast areas out there: Spotify, Amazon Music, Podbean. Also check us out on YouTube. Go on and like and subscribe to our channel so you can see the next upcoming videos from the next special person out there.